Hello everybody, and welcome back to this series. We've been doing a lot of map work and we're going to do more in the future, but in this episode I would like to talk just a little bit about writing processes. We are building a world, and usually we do that around characters and the story we want to tell. And characters grow and change, usually in small ways, sometimes in big ways. They're not supposed to stay the same unless you want them to. Some actually do stay more or less the same, it's just that they learn new information without necessarily needing to grow, but usually we do want our characters to grow. So, I can just put a little... No. This is too big. Character. Give me a little bigger than that. Ahem. We are going to have a bit of a chart here. I'm not going by a book. I am making this up as I go. Every story is about conflict. No conflict, no story. What is conflict? Well, it's kind of a seesaw. You've got one thing on one side and another thing on the other side, and they push off the ground, and one goes up while the other goes down, and then that one goes up and the other one goes down. That's conflict. Conflict is a seesaw. In fact, if I can just... There, sir, is your conflict. Always starting out too big with the text. Not sure why. Not all conflicts are created equal. In fact, I'd say no two are alike. Conflict is like snowflakes. But in particular, how do we create a seesaw effect? Well, through, if I can just, hang on. Smaller! Smaller for your text, I say. Goals? Goals, not koalas, although you can write a story about koalas if you want to, no reason not to. And setbacks. This is your teeter-totter. Your seesaw. And it looks like this. You have your ultimate goal here. That can be survival, happiness, freedom. You have something, and you should tie your character's primary goal, at least in the beginning, because it does change, or it can change. You should tie it to your main theme. Theme is important. It's extremely important. A lot of themes are abstract concepts, and you absolutely can and in fact should have more than one, but usually one of them will take precedence. Friendship. Pivotal to The Lord of the Rings, and also My Little Pony. Sexuality. Not important to every story, but almost uniformly included, and sometimes pivotal. You don't have to place any emphasis on it, you don't even have to work with it. But statistically speaking, most of us are going to. Power. This is a theme that at least every fictional book, every fictional story deals with, okay? Because of the seesaw. Leg, go, boom. Leg, go, boom. You go up, he goes down. He goes up, you go down. Power is extremely important as a theme. So important, in fact, I am going to make it bigger. And I am going to give it an underscore. And we can have sub-themes, like justice. How do you make sure that power is being justly used? And such things as stress. How does it affect people to have power? You can have themes, you can have sub-themes. They don't have to be these. You're just gonna wanna have stuff in here. Now, theoretically, you could make a chart like this for every one of the characters you want to have. More power to you. You might not want to bother making a chart. Maybe you just want to use what you've got in your head. Maybe your chart doesn't look anything like this. Maybe you prioritize other stuff. I'm just showing you something that I'm doing as I'm doing it for my own benefit, for a story I'm writing, and hopefully it inspires you. So we've got conflict, we've got theme, we've got goals and setbacks. That's where the conflict comes from. What those conflicts are should play strongly to the theme. Let's put education on here, because that's pretty important to power. How does power interact with education? How does education affect power? Education typically increases power, but it also can inform you how to and how not to use it, when to and when not to. And it is a big theme in the story I am working on. Now, friendship, you could argue, also goes under power by rights, and sexuality, you absolutely could argue, by rights goes under power. I'm gonna leave them outside though, because that's not really how they relate to this story. Something that does definitely relate to the story through power, however, is race. Okay, some real intersectionality stuff going on here. Some real CRT, at least I hope. I actually stopped working on this story for a long time because the way I was developing it, I came to realize was racist. However, I have come to the conclusion that the base idea was not a bad one. I just need to shake up pretty much everything I already had on it. Everywhere I was originally intending to go with it. It kind of came about because I was watching Netflix's John Carter of Mars, and I was like, really? A Confederate? Why though? So I started working on a story a little bit like that, except that the protagonist was an antebellum black man. So race is a little bit important, you could say. Just a little bit. His name is Max. I will have you know that I came up with the idea for this story and started writing it and named him Max, specifically Maximus, before they even started working on the Fallout TV show. But with that said, Maximus is a name that a lot of people have had throughout history. Fallout doesn't own it. Now his deal is that he speaks Latin. The plantation owner was like, my son is learning Latin and I need somebody besides me for him to talk to because I need to attend business, and you two can just sit on the porch and talk in it. Now, at the time, I was not really prepared to give this the nuance that it requires, but it's backstory. It's just backstory. Speaking of backstory, where should we put that? You know what? I don't think backstory actually belongs on this particular panel. It just kind of comes through with the themes a bit. When we want to set up how we're going to deal with themes in the meat of the book, because it is narrated in his voice, we get his opinion on it. He's forever sniping at Georgia. And you know what? Let's put this over here, next to race, but not under power. Now his goals, his ultimate goals, kind of fluctuate a lot. If we were looking back at his backstory, you might say his goal is freedom. And the setbacks are slavery, and Georgia. And in order to circumnavigate slavery to get to freedom, you have a sub-goal over here. Get away. And the setback to that is plantation and government. Because in the antebellum South, the government is pro-slavery and upholds slavery. And then in order to get around this, we have escape. Wait, no, hang on. We have fight, we have flight, and we have status quo. Now, one of these options is significantly better than the other two, because if you fight the government, or even just the plantation, you are not going to win. If you do status quo, the plantation is going to kill you eventually, and the process is not going to be a happy one. Ergo, flight, while it is very risky, is the preferable option. However, that's before the book starts. That is the backstory. From the first sentence, Max's goal becomes survive. That's a goal each of us shares, except for some briefly. But for him, at the beginning of the book, it is immediate and pressing. Setbacks, desert, and bewilderment. He does not wake up where he went to sleep, if he even was asleep. He doesn't remember the last couple of minutes or the last couple of hours or anything about how he got there. He's just in a strange place that is a desert, and he needs to survive. To get around the desert and the bewilderment, both of those, he wants to find civilization. Preferably not in Georgia. But in order to find civilization, he needs to go through the desert in some direction or other. And in order to survive that, he needs water and food. Thirst may not kill you on day one without water, but you will be as good as dead if you don't find it on day one. You are useless to yourself if you go 24 hours without it. And the 2 days after that it takes you to die are miserable. Although, hang on. The setback would be thirst slash hunger slash heat. Possibility of sunstroke. Now, he shows up with a hat already, and his clothes. But in order to find civilization through the desert and survive, he needs to find water and food. Preferably shade. That's chapter 1. In chapter 1, these are his goals, these are his setbacks, and you can do a lot more with this. It's just, you need this to get past this to this, and you need this to get past this to this. Seesaw. Reversals. Conflict. Conflict! In terms of story structure, you may have seen a graph that looks a little bit like this before. It's labeled equilibrium, inciting... Wait, no. Rising action is here. This down here is the inciting incident. This point right here. You start it with equilibrium, you hit the inciting incident, and that starts your trajectory rising. Trajectory starts your trajectory rising, hence why it's called the rising action. Up here, you have what's called, and I'm not joking, the climax. That's the high point, that's the moment when the most exciting stuff is going on, when all the foreshadowing pays off, and on the other side of it, you have the falling action. And at the bottom here, you have the new equilibrium. And then I like to do a little extra thing at the end here, which is the optional twist. Now this is a traditional structure for a book. You don't have to use it, but in my opinion you should. At least you should know how to, so if you decide not to, you know what you're not doing. Moreover, I like to use it not just for the books as a whole, but for the individual scenes. Every scene has a beginning, a middle, and an end. Each scene is a little story in its own right. It begins with an old equilibrium. It has an inciting incident, it has a rising action, it has a climax, it has a falling action, and it has a new equilibrium, and some of them have twists. When you are building a world, unless you're just doing it to build a world, or to create examples, you are probably doing it to tell a story, specifically a character's story. So this type of thing is going to be important. I actually tend to start with characters and build worlds around them, and that's not a bad thing. There's not much point in writing a book set in your fantasy world if the book itself doesn't bring much to the table. If you just start with one character who has a chart kind of like this, you'll be starting in a pretty good place. Is this professionally done? No, not really. Like I said, I'm just going with stuff I've picked up here and there. These are the processes I find important. Where did Georgia go? Georgia! Where'd you go? Not far enough. My apologies if you live in Atlanta. Let's add another biggie down here. Freedom. That matters a lot. Anyway, just looking at this stuff should hopefully inspire you either to follow it or to deviate from it or to do better than it. Nothing inspires me quite so much as disappointment. I never would have finished writing Bloodstorm if it had not been for The Last Jedi. So if I disappoint you, please just use that disappointment well. I am going to make this chart available on my Discord, and if you are on my Discord, then you can pick it up for free, and there is a link in the description. Please check it out. Although honestly, you certainly could just make a chart like this for yourself, or ignore doing anything about the chart and just remember it. Perhaps it has already served its purpose in your mind, and that's fine. Now let's make something new. Have this be writing / style. / plot. This is the impression that the book is going to leave on its reader. What is the medium going to be like through which we tell our story? The story, in this case, of Maximus existing in this other world he gets whisked away to. Let's have a different section for writing, a different section for style, and a different section for plot. You know what? No. That's garbage. Sorry. Okay, so what am I actually trying to say? Prose is very important. So is plot. I'm going to split prose into voice and Style. Voice. It's character-driven. I went through a phase where I didn't want any of the characters' thoughts to get into the prose. I wanted everybody to have exactly the same narrator who impartially relayed the information not of their thoughts, but of their actions, and have their actions and their words speak for them. I have since deviated from this. I have grown and come to appreciate the voice of the character. In Bloodstorm, we get a little bit of that because the narrator uses different words and different phrases and different patterns for different characters. A little bit about their thought process bleeds through into the narration here and there. In the case of Max, however, his story is narrated by him, so he has an intense voice. Remember, like I said, he's a student of Latin, so he has an immense vocabulary. I'm not planning to do with that what I was originally planning to do with that, but it is a characteristic that is important to who he is, and how he writes, because the book is written from his perspective as a memoir. In terms of style, for this, I like to think about where I am getting my inspiration from. Prosaically, who am I emulating as a writer? With Bloodstorm and Rebel Muster, that would be, honestly, Stephenie Meyer. Because if you think about what makes Stephenie Meyer great and what makes her suck, the great stuff is often the prose. She is very, very good with prose. She is able to get you invested in a very toxic relationship. Her prose pull your eyes across the screen even though you know you're reading garbage and you still want more. However, that is not the style I'm emulating for Max's story. For this story, we are thinking more in terms of G.R.R.M. Bernard Cornwell. So, I've read a few things by Bernard Cornwell, and I don't unreservedly recommend him, but I do reservedly recommend him. He writes a very mean shield wall, and he's very good at grounding the reader in a quote-unquote historical setting through a first-person recollective monologue. I have some beef with him, especially as pertains to his main characters, his perspective characters. But in terms of getting those characters across, he does a pretty good job of it. And we're also going to add Saunders Imaro, because I have been listening to the audiobooks of the Imaro series, and let me just say, if you're a Conan fan, but you've never heard of Imaro, you're in good company, because that was me until recently. But in my opinion, Imaro is a more interesting character than Conan is, and the world he inhabits is a more interesting... Well, yeah, it is a more interesting world, I find, personally. Furthermore, because it's black literature, it has not enjoyed the same, shall we say, reach as the Conan books, which is very unfortunate, I find, because it's really good. We could throw in GRRM as well, but to be honest, that actually applies better to the Traitors' War than it does to this. We're not actually going to be doing as much with individual factions and such like, as he does with the Song of Ice and Fire. This is much more of a sword and sandal type of science fiction / fantasy. But yeah, there's our prose so far, and then in terms of plot, you can go back to this structure, but I wouldn't plot it out on a chart like this. I would actually plot it out in a Word document. In terms of the plot itself, we also have stylistic questions. We could splash here things that we are inspired by. So like a fist full of dollars. Fistful of dollars. We could add Imaro again, because plot. Also, maybe Django. Well, no. Django is a good movie. I'm thinking specifically of Unchained. The original Django is still on my to-be-watched list. But it really doesn't fit in terms of plot here. That could go under voice, perhaps. You know what? Actually, yes, let's put it. Hang on. Inspired a little bit by Django. Unchained! It's a good movie. But not much, if any, went into the plot. Well, I don't know, maybe a little bit. Plot is one thing you really do not want to go to Bernard Cornwell for, or at least I don't. Not for this. His plots, I find, serve the purpose of the books he wants to write, but barely. That's not what I go to him for. I go to Bernard Cornwell almost exclusively for style. Almost exclusively to immerse myself in a historical era. John Carter. Because that was the one that kind of kicked all this off several years ago. And we also should add Empire Strikes Back. One of the best movies ever made, in my opinion. Almost certainly the best Star Wars movie. We got a good splash here. I don't think this particular one is going to be much use to you, so I'm not going to put it on the Discord, but you can make your own real easily. And if you're doing it in a notebook or a sketchpad, then you can scribble new stuff on it all the time and like make notes like, what do you want to take from them? What are you disappointed in them for that you would like to change? This type of thing is just really good for inspiration. I usually don't make these. I'm just showing you the type of thing that matters to me. So that's my example of a writing idea splash. I'm gonna delete this. I'm not gonna need it. What you see here is the file for the stuff that I've got, and we have here an outline. Here we have 4 acts, and plans for parts 1, 2, 3, 4. Say in part 1, Max arrives on a strange world and reveals in past tense recollective narration how he survived and found his way to civilization in the village. He makes friends with people who are familiar with the society and can help him learn to thrive. And this can get really, really detailed and complex, and it should. It should get as complex or stay as minimalistic as you decide. But this is how I'm doing it. And then say in part 2, Max starts using what he learned and becoming a player in the world, but still is sheltered under the umbrella of his affiliates. In part 3, Max's mentor makes bold moves and almost wins the game, but is killed at the last moment. And then in part 4, Max once again must brave the desert, but this time for a longer journey, and must keep both his friends and his enemies alive. So you do have kind of a little bit this structure going on here somewhat. The equilibrium, I'd say, is in the village that he finds, and he's making a life for himself and learning to survive, learning to thrive. The inciting incident is he and his mentor start basically trying to take over, trying to disturb the social order, to topple the tyrants and set up a new anarcho-communist democracy. The inciting incident is kind of that they sort of succeed a little bit to start off with, and they're in charge for a little while. And they start building toward a treaty that his mentor wants to make with surrounding nations so that they're not in a state of war going forward, and it has a real chance of going through, of succeeding. But just as it seems like it's about to, she gets assassinated. The whole thing is a major bust, and everything looks like it's going very, very badly. And you could kind of look at the last section of the book as the falling action and the new equilibrium, because the climax is his mentor's death and the new necessity of him taking charge of his own life, and also the lives of the other survivors of the attack, and saying, no, 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 no. We all survive. We do not turn on each other. I am going to lead you to safety or die trying. All of you. Even the ones I don't like. But once again, this works not just for the overall book, but also for sections and chapters and individual scenes. And what he's doing in that last section is creating a new equilibrium through the course of the falling action. And then at the end, well, there's a little bit of a twist. But as you can tell from the fact I called it optional, the twist is optional. When you get this fleshed out enough, you come back into the file. I have individual chapters as whole. I'm probably going to scrap chapter 3. Because while there is good stuff in there that I can and will make use of, I'm probably going to need to change it in order to make it fit. 1 and 2 might stand as they are, 3 does not quite. Not because it's particularly racist, but because the setup that it is doing was going originally to pay off in ways that I'm not planning to use anymore, and it just needs to set up what I do plan on going with. I only ever got as far as 6 chapters before, and yeah, 4, 5, and 6 I had already decided to scrap because those like I said, it was starting to get untenable. But yes, that's how I outline my books, how I plot my stuff, how I create my characters. These are important tenets of my creative process. And even if they're not exactly up to par, I hope they helped inspire you to develop or to continue developing your own style. I'm thinking maybe next time we'll do some languages, or some work on one language, because worlds have languages. Hang on, let me just Control-C, Control-V. Language 1. And let's make a new folder. Linguistics. And language 1 goes in that. We go Control-A, backspace, and we're ready to start. Next time, not now. See you then, folks. Plot well. Wait, hold on, before we go, I thought of some more important stuff that I didn't even touch on. Arcs. This is super important. Every character has an arc, and most of them are flat. What do I mean? We have all heard of character arcs, but how do we actually understand them? Well, In the course of the story, every character has lies and truth fighting for their attention, and they make choices, and they choose lie or truth, but they begin in a place and they end in a place. A positive character arc begins with a lie and ends with a truth. A negative character arc begins with a truth and ends with a lie. But those are not the only two kinds of character arcs. There's also a flat arc, where a character begins with a lie and ends with a lie. And likewise, they can begin with a truth and end with a truth. Now, your truth does not have to actually be true, and your lie does not actually have to be false. It's about personal growth and emotional health. Each of us lives in a phantasm, in a world constructed to represent the physical world around us. But the narrative lie doesn't necessarily move us farther away from the truth, it moves us to a worse place emotionally. And the narrative truth doesn't necessarily move us into closer alignment with the physical world, it moves us into a better emotional headspace. A villainous backstory typically will be a negative arc beginning with a truth and ending with a lie. A coming-of-age story or an education story will typically begin with a lie and end with a truth. But during the course of most stories, the villain starts with a lie and ends with a lie, and the hero starts with a truth and ends with a truth. I just realized this looks like a tooth, so you can remember it because it's the truth tooth. That is character arcs. Theoretically, if you're writing a novel, then your characters will have many mini arcs. Max, for example, is going to have a whole lot of small positive arcs, but his primary arc, especially because he is his own narrator, is going to be a flat arc, where he begins with a truth and ends with a truth, and rather than reacting to the world around him reacts to him, mostly. Not exclusively. There was, however, another thing, and that is setup and payoff. If I can impart to you only one thing, learn this. You need to set up your exciting moments, and your exciting moments need to pay off your setup. So back on this chart, we've basically got two momentous incidents. We've got the inciting incident and we've got the climax. Everything else makes these two work. In particular, you want your inciting incident to set up your climax, but also you want your equilibrium to set up your inciting incident. You really want your rising action to set up your climax, and all through that, you want to be setting up everything that's going to happen. Some writers seem to try really hard to surprise their readers. That's not me. I don't want my reader to be surprised. I want my reader to be vindicated. I want them to be in on the joke. So surprising them is not the goal. Good setup, good payoff, okay? You ever watch Once Upon a Time? That show is really good at setup and extremely bad at payoff. So you begin something that maybe doesn't pay off until way down the line. But then, it doesn't just come back at that point, it also comes back at the very end. And a little ways in here, you set something up down here, and then that allows you to set up something that will happen in the middle here. And back here, you set up something that will get you through here. William Butler Yeats might refer to this as a gyre. The principle of the gyre is a helpful one to understand. Okay, hang on. You know what? I will, real quick, illustrate that as well as I remember it for you. The concept of a gyre, as Yeats developed it, is you have a new thing starting, and it goes up to a peak, and then it tapers off and goes down, and eventually ends. However, this does not exist in a vacuum, okay? Because while this is just starting, something else is at its peak, and that tapers off as this thing reaches its peak. And as this thing, the thing that we drew first, is tapering off and ending, something else is reaching its peak, and that is a gyre. Okay, this is slightly useful for understanding history. It's very useful for understanding plot progression, setup, payoff. Somebody starts a journey, they get attacked by bandits, and they arrive. While this is going on, bandits are hungry. And then they rob somebody. And then, with their newfound money, they go get food. Plot progression. Okay? So maybe we start the book with the bandits being hungry, and they set out to rob somebody on the road to Nottingham. Then we see that a person, a wealthy noble, is setting out on the road to Nottingham to visit his cousin, who is a clerk to an even more important nobleman, and he's bringing tax money that he squeezed out of peasants with his bare hands. And he starts the journey, and then this little intersection here is not actually an intersection of the two, but rather a point where they are heading toward each other. And then this point is the actual intersection of the characters, where the bandits rob the noble and the noble is robbed by the bandits. But it doesn't have to be so symmetrical. It can be like but something else is like boink, 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 a boink. And then that causes something else. That's like that. Graphs, just gyre stuff. I feel like there was one other thing I was gonna mention, but I forget it, so you're out of luck, this is all you get. Have fun doing character work. Character building is important for world building. As I said earlier, I frequently do it before any other part of the process. Okay, now goodbye.